In this demonstration, we're going to be retouching this image of Abraham Lincoln. This is an image that I pulled off of the Library of Congress website. I did a search and I found what appears to be a high-resolution file at 23 megabytes. It's a TIFF file, and I think for the purposes of this demonstration, it will be great. The very first thing you want to do is develop an approach. When you're doing any kind of retouch job, you need to look at the image and kind of evaluate what needs to happen and in what order it needs to happen. So I can tell from this image, we're definitely going to have to do some retouching work. There's a lot of dust and scratches here. There's some tears. There's some, looks like some stains here that we're going to have to correct. There's also some minor issues with the tonality of the image. So the very first thing we want to do is straighten the image, and we can do that by using the crop tool. I click C for crop tool, and up here in my crop tool options, you'll notice an option to straighten the image. If I click on that, I get these crosshairs, and with these I can define the very top of the image, and you'll notice in the upper right hand side there's a number, and that number tells me how much it's going to rotate the image in order to straighten it. So it says 1 degree. When I depress my mouse button, it will rotate it 1 degree. Now, since I already have the crop tool selected, I'm going to go ahead and in here and shrink down my crop. Okay, I click apply. Now there's a pretty good tonality in this photo. It is a little flat, so what I want to do is add a levels adjustment layer, and I want to just bring in the shadow area slider and the highlight slider just a little bit. I'm holding down option to make certain that I'm not clipping too much off the highlights and shadows. That looks good. And I'm going to hold down option again, and that looks pretty good too. I click apply. I've just added just a little bit of contrast. You can kind of see the difference. Okay, let's go ahead and start taking out some of the dust in this image. There is a lot of dust in this image, and I can come in here with the healing brush or the clone stamp tool or the spot healing brush, but what's going to save me a lot of time with this particular image is using the dust and scratches filter. Because there's so much dust in here, I think that's probably going to be the most efficient way. So before I do anything, I want to make a copy of my background layer. It's always a good practice to name your layers. The first thing I want to do here is select the layer that I want to change. So I come up here to Filter, Noise, Dust and Scratches. Now I'm going to zoom in to 200%, and I want to turn my threshold and radius all the way down. Now I'm going to slowly bring in this dust and scratches filter by changing the radius, and I want to make sure that preview is set to on so I can see the changes. And I'm going to bring this in until the dust just disappears. I don't want to go too far with it because then I start to lose detail and everything else. So I'm going to bring it in until it just disappears. Now I want just the dust to disappear. I want to keep the grain of the image. So that looks pretty good right there. If I click preview, turn it on and off, you can see the effect it's having. Now you'll notice that it's doing a great job of taking the noise out of the background of the image, but it's also impacting the foreground. And you can see that here, we're starting to lose detail in the president's face. Now we can bring back some of that detail by raising the threshold. However, for this particular image, we're going to leave it at 0, and we're going to hit apply. Now if I want to isolate that to just the background, what I can do is create what's known as a layer mask. And I can do that by coming up here to Layer, Layer Mask, Reveal All. Now the way that this works is anything that's white, it will reveal that part of the layer. If it's black, it will conceal that part of the layer. White reveals, black conceals. So if I come back in here and paint on the layer mask, I'm going to go ahead and select my brush tool. If I come back in here and paint with black, what's going to happen? It's going to hide that part of the layer. It's essentially cutting a hole in the layer, enabling us to see the layer below. This is the background layer I'm looking at. So by painting in black onto the layer that we have the dust and scratches filter effect applied, we're essentially localizing this effect. So I'm just masking out this area, and it doesn't have to be perfect. I can come back in here later. So I'm going to turn the background layer back on. So now it's not impacting the foreground layer at all, which is great. So for the rest of this, I'm going to use the spot healing brush. So I want to first create a layer, and in this layer, I'm going to make certain that I have sample all layers turned on. So I have the tool selected. With this tool, I can just find an area that I want to remove, and I just click on it. This is a kind of a time-consuming process. In order for it to look good, you want to take your time with it. So I'm using the bracket keys here, bracket left, bracket right, to increase or decrease the size of the brush. And essentially you want the brush to be just slightly bigger than the area that you're retouching. This works great for spots. For hairs like this, you can click and drag, and it's best to use a brush that is just bigger than the area that you're correcting. Don't try to do this too quickly. Don't try to do this with a giant brush. It just will not look right. So the best way to use this tool is just to take your time with it. So as I work through retouching this image, you'll notice that I'm only retouching the artifact areas. That would be the hairs, the dust, the scratches, but I'm leaving the film grain in there because that's a natural part of the print. And I want this image to look as natural as possible. If I start taking out the film grain, it starts to give the image a digital look. Okay, as you can see here, this definitely took a little while. This process always takes a long time, so it's best to put on some good music and maybe pour yourself a cup of coffee, because there is no quick way of doing this. This took probably about an hour for me to do fully. Now we can look at the results. We can see the before and after. There's the before and the after.